is the most ridiculous or absurd lawsuit you have ever had to fight? Story 1. I used to work as a manager at a small chain of coffee shops, and one day, one of our regulars came in and ordered a regular latte. Nothing unusual there. However, the next day, she came back with a legal document claiming that she had sustained emotional distress due to the temperature of the latte we had served her. Apparently, she took one sip of her drink, and it was just a touch too hot for her taste, causing her to feel irritated and unduly stressed. She claimed that our negligence in the preparation of the drink caused her mental and emotional harm. In her lawsuit, she demanded a significant sum in compensation for the trauma, which she said was so severe that it had impacted her ability to enjoy her daily coffee ritual ever since. Our legal team had to spend hours going over the ridiculous claims and presenting evidence that not only was our coffee made to industry standards, but also that the temperature of coffee is something most people expect. The case was ultimately thrown out, but not before we had to deal with her threatening to bring it to trial. It was an exhausting, bizarre experience that made me lose a little bit of faith in humanity. Story 2. I work as a freelance web developer, and one of my clients reached out for a website redesign. After weeks of work, multiple revisions and consultations, the client was finally happy with the product, and I sent over the invoice. However, the client immediately replied saying they didn't feel like paying the full amount and were instead only going to pay a fraction of the bill. Their reasoning? They believed that my design didn't perfectly reflect their inner vision, whatever that meant. Things escalated quickly when they filed a lawsuit claiming that my design had ruined their business by not aligning with the sacred aesthetic they had in their head. They argued that my work caused them emotional anguish and was even holding them back from achieving their true business potential. I had to defend myself in court, showing the emails, the drafts, and the long list of design requests we had gone through. I couldn't believe I was fighting over something as absurd as aesthetics, but fortunately, the judge ruled in my favor. Still, I lost a few months of my life to that nonsense, and I'm very selective about the clients I take on now. Story 3. A few years ago, my brother was the victim of one of the most absurd lawsuits I've ever seen. He worked as a janitor at a local office building, and one day he found a lost ring in the men's bathroom. A few weeks later, a woman came into the office claiming that she had misplaced her expensive engagement, and it turned out she was in the building that day. The woman immediately accused my brother of stealing it, even though there was absolutely no evidence linking him to the missing ring. She even said that she had felt a strange energy when she walked into the bathroom and knew the ring was nearby. She sued him for theft, emotional distress, and even requested compensation for the alleged damage caused to her sense of security. It took months of legal back and forth, including witness testimony from coworkers who all confirmed that my brother was not involved in any way. In the end, the case was dismissed, and the woman was fined for wasting court time. It's crazy how someone can just fabricate a story and cause so much trouble. Story 4. I once worked in a retail store, and one day, a customer tried to return a pair of shoes she had bought over 6 months ago. They were clearly worn, the soles were scuffed up, and they reeked of a musty odor. When we refused her return, she went ballistic. She called the cops, threatened to sue the store, and even went so far as to claim that our store was a trap for unsuspecting customers who unknowingly bought faulty, worn-out merchandise. The absurdity didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail from a lawyer representing the woman, stating that we had caused her mental suffering by refusing her return. The lawsuit claimed that we had deliberately exploited her trust by selling her the shoes, and that our unethical actions caused her public embarrassment. We ended up having to hire a lawyer to fight the case, and after some back and forth and a good deal of paperwork, it was dismissed. We even sent her a formal apology letter, but only because we wanted the issue to go away. It was ridiculous, but it was also a strange reminder of how some people are willing to go to any length to make a quick buck. Story 5. This one is a real head-scratcher. I had a friend who worked at a local gym, and one day, a member came in and started complaining about a recent personal training session. Apparently, the trainer had suggested she work out on the treadmill for 20 minutes as a warm-up, and she didn't like it. She felt it was demeaning and insulting, that the trainer didn't understand her needs. The customer then claimed that the trainer's recommendation made her feel fat, and filed a lawsuit for emotional distress and psychological damage caused by the encounter. The lawsuit, which was completely ludicrous, argued that the trainer's suggestion led to a significant mental breakdown and a subsequent inability to trust fitness professionals. My friend had to spend weeks providing evidence that treadmill sessions are a standard part of any fitness program and that the trainer had followed all proper procedures. In the end, the case was dismissed, but it was an embarrassing and unnecessary ordeal. Story 6. A few years ago, I found myself in the middle of an extremely bizarre legal battle involving a neighborhood dispute. I lived in a quiet suburban area, and like most people in my neighborhood, I had a pretty good relationship with my neighbors. Everything was peaceful, until one day, I received a letter from a lawyer claiming that I was disturbing the peace with my gardening habits. The issue? Apparently, my neighbor across the street, who had a reputation for being a bit eccentric, took offense to the way I pruned my hedges. According to them, my hedges were blocking their spiritual flow, and the manner in which I cut them was negatively impacting their positive energy. In their letter, they described how each time I trimmed the hedges, it created a disruptive energy field that was impeding their ability to concentrate and live peacefully in their home. This lawsuit didn't stop at just complaining about my gardening. It escalated quickly into a full-blown legal threat, with claims that my unsanctioned hedge pruning was causing them mental distress and preventing them from achieving their desired lifestyle. They even went so far as to argue that the natural energy imbalance was affecting their health. The situation was so absurd that I was honestly tempted to give up on my hobbies altogether, but I decided to fight back. After months of legal back and forth, I was able to show that there was no physical or legal reason why my gardening activities were infringing on their life. The case was dismissed, but the entire episode left me wondering just how far people will go with their grievances, no matter how strange. Story 7. I've been a dog trainer for over a decade, and in all that time, I thought I'd heard it all. But one particular lawsuit took me completely by surprise. A couple came to me asking for help with their dog, a German Shepherd who had developed severe behavioral issues. The dog was aggressive towards strangers, and they wanted me to train it to become more socialized. After a few weeks of training, I met with the couple to discuss progress. During this meeting, they told me that they had taken the dog to a park for some socialization exercises, but things went south quickly. The dog became agitated around another dog, and when a stranger approached, it barked and lunged. No one was hurt, but it was a tense situation. A week later, I received a legal notice from the couple. They were suing me for negligence because they claimed that the training hadn't worked and that the dog had become more aggressive under my care. They argued that I was responsible for the emotional trauma they experienced and that my failed techniques had put them in a dangerous situation at the park. This lawsuit felt absurd on so many levels. But what really threw me off was that they had recorded the entire incident at the park and were using it as evidence. They insisted that the dog's behavior was worse after working with me and that I had pushed the dog beyond its capabilities. My team and I provided evidence of the dog's history and the fact that behavior modification takes time, but the couple was determined. It eventually settled out of court. But the stress and expense of dealing with that case was unreal. I'll never forget how a simple training session could become a full-on legal nightmare. Story 8. This one is wild. A friend of mine is a professional photographer, and she was hired by a local restaurant to take some promotional photos for their new menu. The client was very specific about what they wanted: clean, sharp images of the food with perfect lighting to make everything look appetizing. After several hours of shooting and editing, she sent the final images to the restaurant. They loved them at first. About a week later, she received an email from the restaurant's owner asking for a full refund. Confused, she called them to ask what was wrong. The owner told her that they weren't happy with the photos because they didn't make the food look delicious enough. Apparently, after showing the photos to some regular customers, they felt that the food didn't look as appetizing as they had hoped, and that their business was going to suffer as a result. But here's where it gets even more ridiculous. The restaurant owner filed a lawsuit claiming that my friend's photos had damaged their business and misrepresented the quality of their food. They were suing for the loss of sales, arguing that their customers were emotionally distressed by the photos. Of course, my friend had a signed contract that explicitly stated the scope of her work, but the restaurant owner refused to accept responsibility for their unrealistic expectations. The case dragged on for months before finally being dismissed. But the entire ordeal left my friend feeling like she was in an alternate reality. Who knew food photography could cause such chaos? Story 9. A few years ago, I was working as an event planner for a high-end corporate firm. One of our most high-profile clients asked us to plan a major product launch event. We went all out, booking a beautiful venue, arranging catering, hiring entertainment, and coordinating a full schedule for the night. Everything was in place, and the night went off without a hitch. People were thrilled with the event, and we received nothing but positive feedback. But then, a few days later, I received a phone call that completely stunned me. It was the client's lawyer, informing me that the company was suing us for failure to deliver a memorable experience and emotional distress. According to them, our event did not meet the client's expectations of luxury and exclusivity, even though we had followed every instruction to the letter. The lawsuit claimed that the lack of an ultra-elite ambiance at the event had caused the executives to suffer extreme disappointment and led to a failure in strategic business goals. The claim was so outlandish that it left us speechless. We had gone above and beyond to create a luxurious experience, but apparently, they were hoping for something even more extravagant that they didn't make clear in the original discussions. The legal team for the company tried to argue that we had misled them into believing we could provide a certain level of experience. It took several months to settle, and we ended up providing a small reimbursement for the fees, just to get it over with. The entire thing was a reminder of how unreasonable some clients can be, and how important it is to document every detail, no matter how absurd it may seem. Story 10. This one's a bit of a head-scratcher. I work as a local mechanic, and one day, a customer came in to get his car repaired. The car had been running poorly for a few weeks, and he asked me to replace the brakes. After the work was done, the customer seemed satisfied, paid for the service, and left. Everything seemed fine until he came back a few days later, furious. He told me that after leaving the shop, he had driven the car to his job, and the car broke down on the way there. He claimed that because of the brake replacement, something had gone wrong, causing a series of issues with the car's performance. He even blamed me for causing a chain reaction of mechanical failure. But here's the kicker. He was suing me for unlawful repairs and unnecessary maintenance, saying that he had never authorized a brake replacement. Despite the fact that we had documented every interaction and had his signed approval for the job, he insisted that he never agreed to the service and that we had taken advantage of him. The lawsuit dragged on for a few months as I had to prove that we had done the work properly and that the issues the car had were unrelated to the brake replacement. In the end, the case was thrown out, but the whole experience was so ridiculous that I almost gave up my profession entirely. Some people just don't take responsibility for their own mistakes. Story 11. I'm a landscape architect, and about a year ago, I found myself in the middle of a completely absurd lawsuit. A client hired me to redesign their backyard, and after months of discussions, I came up with a beautiful design. A raised garden bed with a water feature and a patio area perfect for outdoor entertaining. The client was thrilled with the plan and signed the contract without any issues. After about 2 months of construction, everything was completed, and I handed the final product over to them. However, a few weeks later, I received a letter from their lawyer. They were suing me for psychological distress, claiming that the water feature I designed had created a sense of drowning anxiety every time they sat outside. The client argued that the sound of water in the fountain, although soothing to most, had triggered their pre-existing fear of water, which they said I should have anticipated. The lawsuit didn't stop there. They claimed that my failure to take their phobia into account had damaged their mental well-being and negatively impacted their family dynamics. I couldn't even fathom how they thought I should have known about this fear in the first place. We had discussed the design several times, but the idea of water phobia never came up. After consulting with a lawyer and providing all the emails and documents from the project, it was eventually dismissed. But I learned the hard way that sometimes, no matter how professional you are, some people will try to find any reason to make a claim. I now include a disclosure of phobias clause in all my contracts. Story 12. A few years ago, I worked as a server at a well-known chain restaurant. One evening, I served a couple who seemed to enjoy their meals just fine, until they suddenly started complaining about the ambiance. They argued that the lighting was too bright, the music was too loud, and they could feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety from the general vibe of the restaurant. After their meal, they asked to speak with the manager, where they proceeded to demand a full refund for their dinner. They claimed that the experience had left them emotionally shaken and unable to enjoy a peaceful evening. The restaurant refused their refund request because they had eaten everything on their plates, and there was no valid reason to refund the meal. A few days later, I was stunned to receive a lawsuit letter from their attorney. Apparently, they were suing the restaurant for negligent emotional distress due to the restaurant's poorly designed atmosphere and failure to provide a calming dining experience. They wanted $10,000 in damages for the psychological harm they had suffered. The absurdity of it all was unreal. The case was eventually thrown out, but the whole thing caused a lot of stress at work. I never imagined that someone could sue over something as vague as restaurant ambiance, but it's a reminder that some people will try to exploit any inconvenience to get money. Story 13. This might be one of the strangest legal battles I've been involved in. A friend of mine is a baker, and she owns a small bakery in town. One day, a customer came in and ordered a custom cake for her daughter's birthday party. The cake was supposed to be designed as a large unit complete with rainbow-colored frosting and a fondant. Everything seemed normal, and my friend spent hours making the cake, following the exact specifications. The customer picked it up, and all was well, until the next day when my friend got a call from the woman's lawyer. The client was suing for false advertising and emotional distress because the cake didn't look exactly like the unicorn in the photos she had shown. She argued that the cake was too cartoonish and that her daughter had been traumatized because it didn't resemble the unicorn she had imagined. Apparently, her daughter's birthday party had been ruined because the cake was not as realistic as expected. The lawyer claimed that my friend's inaccurate cake had caused the child emotional distress, and as a result, the entire family had been deprived of a joyful event. We thought it was a joke at first, but after getting a lawyer involved, the case did drag on for several months. Ultimately, the court sided with my friend, but it was an incredibly ridiculous situation to be. It still blows my mind that someone would sue over the design of a cake, but I guess it's a reminder that people have very high expectations, especially when it comes to something like a birthday cake. Story 14. I used to work as a lifeguard at a public swimming pool, and one summer, I got involved in an outrageous lawsuit that really tested my patience. A man was swimming in the pool when he had an accident, slipping on the poolside tiles as he tried to jump in. He didn't seriously injure himself, but he claimed to have twisted his ankle and demanded that the lifeguard on duty, me, help him. Despite his request, I remained calm, ensured he was out of the water, and told him to sit on the poolside while waiting for medical help to arrive. He didn't seem that hurt and was actually complaining about the poor quality of poolside tiles, saying they were dangerous and responsible for his fall. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the man's lawyer, claiming that I was responsible for his injury because I didn't stop him from attempting to jump into the pool. The lawsuit alleged that I encouraged reckless behavior by failing to properly educate poolgoers about the risks associated with jumping and diving into the pool. The case dragged on for months, and while the insurance company ultimately paid the settlement, it was infuriating to think that I was being blamed for something that wasn't even in my control. As a lifeguard, you can only do so much to prevent accidents, but apparently, some people want to pin the blame on others to avoid taking responsibility for their own actions. Story 15. This is one of the most bizarre lawsuits I've ever heard of, and it came from a neighbor of mine. I lived in a townhouse, and one day I noticed that a new neighbor had moved in. The first few months were fine, but then I started hearing complaints about the loud noises coming from my house. My neighbor would often knock on my door or send me notes, saying that the sounds of my walking on the floor above them were too loud. I was a bit taken aback, but I tried to be considerate and keep the noise down. However, things escalated when my neighbor filed a formal lawsuit against me. They claimed that the unnatural sounds of my footsteps had caused them extreme anxiety and were even disrupting their sleep schedule. Their lawyer argued that I was inflicting unnecessary distress by violating their peace with my everyday walking. The lawsuit also stated that they had seriously considered moving because of the psychological toll the sounds had taken on. It was honestly mind-blowing, as I had never even thought of walking as something that could be considered noise pollution. In the end, the case was dismissed, but I'll never forget the stress and confusion of being sued for something as mundane as walking around in my own home. Now, whenever I move, I always make sure to live in a house with a little more space between me and my neighbors, just in case. Story 16. A few years ago, I worked as an elementary school teacher in a fairly quiet district. I enjoyed teaching, but one particular incident turned into one of the most absurd lawsuits I've ever been involved in. It started with a simple class project where the students were tasked with making dioramas of historical events. One of the students, a young boy, created a very realistic diorama of a medieval battle, complete with tiny knights and castles. He proudly brought it in the next day, but when I saw it, I noticed that the diorama featured some very graphic details, including knights beheading each other. I immediately recognized that the project was too graphic for a classroom setting, especially for young children. I calmly approached the student and suggested that he make a few modifications, maybe tone down the violence. He agreed, and we discussed it together. The following week, the boy's parents showed up at my classroom, livid. They claimed that I had discriminated against their son's artistic expression and that I was stifling his creativity. They argued that I had no right to tell him how to express himself, even though the content was violent and inappropriate for his age group. The situation escalated quickly, and before I knew it, I was served with a lawsuit for emotional distress and intellectual property infringement. They accused me of harming their son's mental state by criticizing his passion for medieval history. I couldn't believe what was happening. The case went nowhere, and the judge ultimately sided with me. But the entire situation was a surreal reminder that some parents will fight over the smallest, most ridiculous issues. Story 17. I'm a freelance photographer, and one of my most memorable and ridiculous experiences involved a wedding shoot that turned into an absolute nightmare. I was hired by a couple for their wedding, and everything seemed to go smoothly during the ceremony. The couple was happy with the photos I took, and they paid me promptly for my work. However, about a month later, I received an email from the bride's lawyer, who was threatening a lawsuit. Apparently, the bride was upset that, in one of the photos, her dress didn't look as perfect as she had imagined. It wasn't wrinkled or anything, but she claimed the lighting made the fabric look slightly darker than it actually was. The lawyer argued that the photo misrepresented her dress and that it would have a negative impact on her reputation if it was shared online. In the lawsuit, they demanded that I remove the image from my portfolio, delete it from all social media accounts, and pay for any emotional distress caused by the photo. They even went so far as to accuse me of intentionally making the dress look less flattering because I was jealous of her beauty. It was hard to take them seriously, but unfortunately it dragged on for a few months. I ended up offering a small refund just to avoid the hassle of court, but the whole ordeal was one of the most absurd experiences I've had in my career. The idea that a photographer could be sued over the way light interacted with fabric still blows my mind to this day. Story 18. A friend of mine worked as a personal trainer at a popular gym, and his experience with a lawsuit was so outlandish that it's hard to believe. One of his clients, a man in his early 40s, signed up for training with the goal of getting healthier and improving his fitness. After several months of training, the client had lost a significant amount of weight and was generally happy with his progress. But one day, the client called my friend and informed him that he was going to sue for mental anguish and unwarranted weight loss. The client explained that although he had lost weight, he had become uncomfortably slim, and his self-confidence had been shattered because his family had commented on how different he looked. He argued that my friend had pushed him too hard during workouts and caused him to lose too much weight too quickly. The client also claimed that my friend had used deceptive practices by not warning him about the potential emotional consequences of weight loss. My friend, who had been nothing but supportive and careful about the client's goals, was completely shocked. The client's claims were completely unfounded, but it didn't stop the man from filing a lawsuit. The case took several months to resolve, and in the end, the client received nothing. But my friend's reputation was tarnished for a while. The absurdity of suing over weight loss was a reminder that people sometimes look for someone to blame when they feel uncomfortable with their own progress. Story 19. I used to work in a high-end boutique selling luxury jewelry. One of the strangest lawsuits I've ever been involved in happened when a regular customer came in and bought an expensive bracelet. She loved the design and even mentioned that she had been eyeing it for months. After purchasing it, she left the store happily, but a week later she came back and demanded a refund. She claimed that the bracelet didn't fit her lifestyle and that she had suffered emotional trauma after wearing it. According to her, the bracelet made her feel out of place at social gatherings, and she couldn't stand the constant reminder of her frivolous spending. In her lawsuit, she argued that the store had tricked her into thinking the bracelet was necessary for her happiness and social stand, claiming the salesperson's description of the bracelet had been too convincing. The lawsuit also claimed that the emotional distress she experienced from wearing the bracelet had led to a series of psychological problems, including insomnia and irritability. It was absolutely baffling to hear, but the legal team had to take the case seriously. We eventually settled out of court, but the entire experience left me questioning how people could turn such a minor purchase into a serious legal matter. The absurdity of the whole thing made me wonder if some people were just looking for any reason to get money back, even when it wasn't about the item at all. Story 20. A few years ago, I worked as a graphic designer, and I took on a project for a new local startup that specialized in custom-made stationery. The business owner had very specific ideas for the design of their brand logo and was extremely hands-on during the entire process. After a few rounds of revisions, we finally settled on a logo that both the owner and I were happy with. But about a month later, the client sent me an email accusing me of negligent design and demanding that I refund the entire amount. According to them, the logo didn't look professional enough and was causing them to lose business because it didn't look luxurious enough for their brand. They said the logo gave off a cheap vibe and that they had already lost clients because of it. The client even went as far as to claim that I had ruined their business and that their reputation was damaged due to my work. They filed a lawsuit accusing me of intellectual negligence and defrauding them by not providing them with a logo that met their standards. Of course, the design was exactly what they had approved, and I had proof of all communications and approvals along the way. The case was dismissed after some legal back and forth, but the emotional toll it took on me was immense. I had done the work to the best of my ability, but it was maddening to see someone try to blame you for their own dissatisfaction when they had fully approved everything. It was a painful reminder that no good deed goes unpunished when it comes to some clients. Story 21. A friend of mine works as a professional event planner, and she recently found herself wrapped up in one of the most bizarre lawsuits I've ever heard of. She had been hired to organize a luxury charity gala, which was to be held at an extravagant hotel in downtown. The event had been planned meticulously, high-end catering, performances by local musicians, and a guest list of prominent business owners and socialites. Everything was going perfect, that is, until the night of the event. One of the guests, a well-known local entrepreneur, approached her mid-event and said that he was distressed by the color of the napkins on the table. He argued that the shade of ivory was too dull and didn't complement the venue's decor. He claimed that the slight mismatch had ruined the mood of the evening and was disrupting his peace of mind, even going as far as to say that it was affecting his ability to socialize effectively. After the gala, the man proceeded to file a lawsuit, demanding compensation for the psychological toll caused by the color of the napkins. He argued that his evening was irreparably harmed by the poor color choice, claiming he was unable to make business deals and establish connections because of the ambiance being off. The suit also included allegations that my friend, the event planner, had not paid attention to detail and had caused him unnecessary stress. It took months to get the case thrown out, but in the end, the entire ordeal was dismissed. My friend still laughs about it, but the ridiculousness of someone suing over napkin color has stayed with her, a constant reminder of how strange people can be in their expectations. Story 22. I've worked as a freelance writer for years, but one particular project left me with a story I'll never forget. A couple contacted me to write their wedding vows. They wanted something truly special, deep, and heartfelt. After discussing their preferences, I spent a week crafting a beautiful set of vows for them. I poured my heart into the words, making sure they captured the couple's journey and love story. They seemed pleased with the first draft and approved it quickly. The big day came, and I didn't hear anything more about the vows until a few weeks after the wedding. I received an angry email from the bride, claiming that the vows I had written were completely inappropriate and embarrassing. She said that the vows had ruined the entire ceremony and that they were too emotional for her taste. The couple's friends and family had supposedly laughed during the ceremony because the vows were too over the top for a modern wedding. Then, to my shock, the bride's lawyer sent me a formal notice. She was suing me for emotional distress, arguing that I had caused her undue embarrassment and that I had undermined the sanctity of her wedding day by writing vows that were too personal. The lawsuit demanded a refund for the full amount she had paid me and compensation for the alleged trauma caused by my words. I couldn't believe it. I had written the vows exactly as requested, but she claimed they were too exaggerated and not the simple, casual vows she had envisioned. Fortunately, the case was quickly dismissed, but I'll always remember the oddity of it. Who sues a writer over wedding vows? Story 23. A friend of mine worked as a mechanic for a local car shop, and his most bizarre experience involved a lawsuit from a woman who had her car repaired. She came in with a broken alternator and asked for a replacement. My friend did the work and installed the new part, following all the standard procedures. She picked up her car, paid the bill, and seemed satisfied. However, a week later, she returned, furious. She claimed that the replacement alternator was inferior and that it had caused her car troubles that weren't present before. She demanded a refund, claiming that her car was actually worse than before and that the repair had somehow made things worse. My friend knew the repair had been done correct, so he assured her that there were no issues with the alternator. A few days after that, the woman sent a letter from her lawyer, stating that my friend's work had caused severe damage to the car and that she was suffering mental distress because her trust had been violated. The suit claimed that my friend had acted negligently by not foreseeing the negative impact of the alternator change, despite the fact that the part was functioning perfectly. My friend had to go through months of legal back and forth, ultimately having to provide documentation proving the car's previous issues and the fact that the alternator was working fine. The case was dropped, but the whole ordeal was ridiculous. He couldn't believe someone would file a lawsuit over a car repair when all the facts clearly pointed to no fault on his part. It left him questioning how some people view service professionals as automatic targets when things don't go exactly as they expected. Story 24. This story happened to a friend of mine who worked as a wedding photographer. He was hired by a couple for their big day, and everything seemed to go according to plan, until the reception. The bride had a specific request. She wanted a candid photo of her and her bridesmaids laughing together, ideally while they were enjoying a fun moment during the party. My friend took a few shots, and as requested, the bride and her bridesmaids were laughing joyfully, looking natural and happy. However, weeks later, the bride reached out furious. She said that the candid photo was unflattering and that she looked terrible in it. She accused my friend of taking a bad angle and making her appear larger than she actually was. The bride demanded that the photo be completely edited out of the package and that my friend pay for the psychological damage caused by the misrepresentation of her body. The lawsuit claimed that the photo had made her feel uncomfortable in her own skin and that it was damaging to her mental health, given that she was trying to maintain a flawless image. It was absurd that someone could take such a small issue and turn it into a major legal problem. My friend offered to remove the photo from the final album, but the bride insisted on a refund for the entire wedding shoot. Ultimately, the case went nowhere after a few legal back and forths, but it was a clear example of how even the most harmless and candid moments can lead to completely unreasonable expectations from clients. Story 25. I've been a graphic designer for over 15 years, but one of the strangest legal situations I've encountered was with a client who hired me to create a logo for their new vegan restaurant. After a few weeks of brainstorming and revisions, we finalized a clean, simple logo that prominently featured green leaves and soft colors to match the eco-friendly theme of the restaurant. The client was happy, and we signed off on the design. However, a few days later, the client called, sounding distraught. They claimed that the logo I had created was too environmentally friendly and that it had alienated a segment of their audience. They argued that their restaurant catered to a wider market and that the leaf motif made their brand seem too radical and narrow. But the real kicker came when they filed a lawsuit. The client claimed that my design had destroyed their brand, accusing me of misleading them into a niche market they had never intended to target. They wanted compensation for the loss of potential customers, and even demanded a rebranding at my expense. I was floored. After months of discussions, they had signed off on the design, but now they were blaming me for a marketing strategy failure that was entirely theirs. The case ended up being dismissed, but it was an exhausting and bewildering experience. It taught me the hard way to get every detail in writing, and to never underestimate how far some people will go to avoid taking responsibility for their own decisions. Story 26. A few years ago, I was involved in a completely absurd lawsuit involving a small family-owned bakery I used to frequent. I had become friendly with the owners, who were always kind and welcoming, and I would stop by almost every morning for my coffee and pastry before work. One day, the husband and wife team introduced me to a new flavor of scones they had just developed, and I couldn't resist trying one. I was blown away. It was delicious. After a few days, I went back to the bakery and noticed that the scones were no longer on the menu. I asked the wife about it, and she explained that they had received a complaint from a regular customer who didn't like the scones. The customer claimed that they tasted too exotic and were too bold for a typical bakery. The complaint wasn't enough to make them remove the scones entirely, but it did cause them to scale back production. I suggested that the bakery try marketing the scones as a seasonal item instead, so that they could keep them on the menu without forcing them on anyone who didn't like them. A few weeks later, I was shocked to find out that the disgruntled customer had filed a lawsuit claiming that the scones had caused him mental anguish and that they infringed upon his rights to peace of mind when he ordered them. According to the lawsuit, the overpowering exotic flavors had caused him emotional distress and made him feel unwelcome in a place that should offer simple, traditional pastries. The suit demanded an undisclosed amount of money for emotional compensation. I could hardly believe it. The case was dismissed after a lot of legal back and forth, but not before the bakery owners had to pay for a lawyer to deal with the bizarre accusations. It was one of the strangest things I've ever encountered, and a reminder that people sometimes take the most trivial matters to extremes. Story 27. I once worked as a photographer for a luxury home real estate company, where I had to capture high-quality images of expensive properties. One day, I was sent to photograph a stunning mansion that had just been listed. The house was impressive: huge windows, vaulted ceilings, and a gorgeous backyard overlooking a lake. The owners of the property were thrilled, and even spent a bit of time showing me around as I set up the shots. Everything was fine until about a week later when the owner called me, furious. He claimed that my photographs had misrepresented the size and grandeur of the home. The images, he argued, made the house look smaller and less grand than it really was. He said that this misrepresentation had already caused him to lose several potential buyers. According to him, the pictures distorted the property's true scale, and it was unethical to present it that way. Then, he took it a step further. The man filed a lawsuit accusing me of fraud and negligent misrepresentation, claiming that my photography had damaged his ability to sell the property and that it had caused him undue financial distress. He also demanded that I pay for the lost revenue from the listings that didn't sell. The whole thing was ridiculous. I explained that I had taken the pictures according to standard professional guidelines and that no editing had been done to make the house look smaller. The case went nowhere after a few months of legal wrangling, but it made me question just how far people will go when they feel like something didn't turn out the way they envisioned. Story 28. I used to work as a tech support specialist at a large company, and one of the most bizarre lawsuits I had to deal with came from a customer who was, frankly, out of touch with reality. This particular customer had called in with an issue regarding his internet connection, which he claimed had been dropping intermittently. After going through the usual troubleshooting steps, I concluded that the problem might be related to his router. I suggested he replace it or at least reset it, but he seemed unwilling to do so. He insisted that the issue was a problem with our service and not his equipment. A few days later, I received a letter from the customer's lawyer. To my shock, the man was suing the company for emotional distress, claiming that the poor internet connection had caused him severe psychological damage. According to the lawsuit, he argued that the frequent disconnects had led to feelings of inadequacy and despair because he could not finish his work or maintain social connections through video calls. His lawyer went on to argue that our failure to fix the issue had interfered with his personal life and well-being. The case went on for several months as the legal team tried to figure out how to respond. Eventually, we were able to provide proof that the problem was with his router and not our service, and the case was thrown out. Still, the entire experience made me realize how far some people are willing to go to find someone else to blame for their frustrations, no matter how unreasonable the claims are. Story 29. I had a friend who worked as a bartender at a trendy bar, and he had one of the most absurd experiences with a lawsuit I've ever heard. One night, a customer came in and ordered a craft cocktail. The bar had a policy of serving drinks with a signature garnish, a small sprig of rosemary or a twist of citrus peel, depending on the drink. After taking a sip of his drink, the customer looked upset and immediately called the bartender over. He complained that the rosemary garnish was ruining the taste of the cocktail and that it made the drink undrinkable. He then started yelling at my friend, insisting that the drink was improperly made and that it had destroyed his night out. After some back and forth, the customer asked for a refund, which my friend, following the bar's policy, refused. The situation didn't end there. A few weeks later, the bartender received a letter from the customer's lawyer claiming that the garnish had caused emotional distress. The lawsuit alleged that the flavor of the rosemary had invaded his senses and caused him mental suffering and discomfort throughout the evening. The suit demanded not only a refund for the drink, but also compensation for the lasting psychological effects the garnish had caused. My friend was stunned, but after months of legal back and forth, the case was dismissed. It was a wild experience for him, but it also taught him a valuable lesson. Never underestimate how far some people will go over something as small as a garnish on their cocktail. Story 30. I once worked at a small boutique clothing store, and one of our customers filed the most ridiculous lawsuit I've ever witnessed. The customer came in one afternoon and bought a beautiful hand-stitched leather jacket that we had just received as part of our new fall collection. He was thrilled with the jacket, claiming it was exactly what he had been looking for, and left the store happy. A few weeks later, the customer returned to the store with the jacket in hand and demanded a refund. He claimed that the jacket was unwearable because it didn't fit him as perfectly as he had imagined. He insisted that the leather felt stiff and that the jacket didn't give him the lifestyle aura he thought it would. Apparently, he believed that the jacket was supposed to transform him into some kind of stylish hero, and when it didn't live up to those expectations, he said he felt betrayed. The man didn't just ask for a refund. He filed a lawsuit claiming that the jacket had psychologically damaged him by causing him to feel unattractive and unconfident. According to him, the jacket had ruined his sense of self-worth, and he sought compensation for emotional trauma caused by his purchase. It was unbelievable. The lawsuit went nowhere after we provided all the evidence that the jacket had been sold as is, and that no promises about its effect on the wearer's self-esteem had been made. The entire situation was dismissed, but it left us all wondering, how could someone be so disconnected from reality that they thought a jacket could harm their self-worth? Story 31. A few years ago, I worked as a personal shopper for a high-end fashion store. One day, a client came in and asked me to help her pick out a special outfit for an important event, a charity gala she was hosting. She wanted something that would make a statement, so we went all out, picking out a stunning gown, accessories, and shoes. Everything was meticulously chosen, and she was thrilled with the selection. She even told me that it was the best shopping experience she had ever had. A week later, I got a call from the client. She was furious and claimed that the dress I had helped her pick out was ruining her reputation because it made her look too perfect. She explained that after she wore the outfit to the gala, people had been staring at her all night, and some of the guests had even complimented her excessively. Apparently, the attention had made her feel uncomfortable and out of place. According to her, the outfit had caused her emotional distress because she felt like a target in the social circle she was in. She demanded a full refund for the outfit and threatened to sue for psychological harm. She claimed that I had chosen the dress without considering the mental strain it would cause her by putting her in the spotlight. The lawsuit was based on the idea that my fashion advice had unintentionally led her to a place of social anxiety and stress. To my surprise, the case was dismissed after a few months of legal wrangling, but the whole experience taught me that sometimes, no matter how much effort you put into helping a client, they can still find something to complain about, even if it's their own insecurities at the root of the problem. Story 32. I worked as a restaurant manager at a popular family-owned Italian place for several years, and I thought I had seen it all, until one particular incident. One evening, a customer came in and ordered a simple pasta dish. Everything seemed normal, but about halfway through the meal, the customer raised his hand and asked to speak with the manager. When I approached him, he looked very upset and said that the pasta was too al dente, and that he could not continue eating it because it disrupted his digestion. I apologized and immediately offered to have the dish replaced with something else. He declined, stating that the meal was already ruined and that he felt physically uncomfortable from chewing something that was too firm. I offered him a discount on the bill, but he refused and left the restaurant in a huff. I thought that would be the end of it. The next week, I was served a legal notice from the customer's lawyer. Apparently, he was suing for emotional distress and food-related trauma. According to his claim, the pasta's texture had disrupted his natural rhythm of eating, which had led to serious internal discomfort and caused him to feel mentally distressed for the rest of the evening. The lawsuit demanded compensation for the alleged psychological harm caused by the pasta's texture. Naturally, the case was dismissed, but the entire situation left me speechless. To this day, I can't understand how someone could file a lawsuit over the texture of pasta. The world is full of surprises, I guess. Story 33. I've been a freelance writer for a few years now, and in that time I've had my share of clients, but one in particular really took the cake. A marketing firm hired me to write a series of articles for their website, which I did with the usual care and attention. One of the articles was about the best ways to decorate your home for the holidays, which I thought was an easy, fun piece. After submitting the draft, I received feedback from the client. They were happy with it, but requested a minor change. They wanted me to include a section on modern holiday decor, which I added without issue. But then, things took a strange turn. A few weeks later, I received a call from the firm's lawyer, informing me that they were suing me for artistic theft. According to them, one of the suggestions I had made about using minimalist decor in a home had directly copied a design article that the client had seen elsewhere. They claimed that I had infringed upon their creative rights by using ideas that had already been seen on their website. The lawsuit was based on the fact that they had once mentioned minimalism in one of their past articles, which had no direct connection to the one I wrote, and they felt that I had stolen their creative approach. They claimed I had misappropriated their intellectual property, and that it was emotionally damaging to the company's reputation. The case was dismissed quickly, as there was no basis for the claims. But the stress was enough to make me reconsider working with larger companies. It was a reminder that sometimes a small piece of content could lead to a big mess, especially when someone has too much time on their hands.